mic. Om Shanti. Good evening. Welcome to the inaugural session, question and answer called Soul Searching. Question and answer specifically about Raj Yoga, the study of Raj Yoga. So, this is going to be a very interesting situation because it's your questions. So you'll have to use the chat box if you have a question that you would like to ask. We did receive one question by email, but we want to make sure that whatever we're talking about is of interest to you. So if anyone is out there and anyone has a question, feel free to type into the chat box now and we can look at it. And if not, we'll be subject to whatever comes out of this mouth. Mm-hmm. Do you have a question? But did you have a question yourself? Yeah. Okay. Well, wading through the flood of questions that's coming in. Not. Okay. So if for those who have just arrived, which I've heard there are some that just arrived, you have arrived at something we're calling soul searching. But what it is question and answer around the study of Raj Yoga. We elicited questions before by email, but I know it was very short notice. So if you've just arrived and if you have a question regarding Raj Yoga, the study of Raj Yoga, the spiritual practice, just type it in the chat box and we can take it up this evening. So I'll give you a few seconds to do that if there is a question you have. So it appears there is not. We did receive one question by email. It's quite a full and deep question, so we might take an oblique approach to it. Yeah, I do remember, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the question really ironically looked at the essence of Raj Yoga. So just to remind you, if you're completely new to the practice or just beginning, Raj Yoga is a spiritual study that focuses on self-transformation. So as an organization, our slogan is, as I change, the world changes. So the idea being that we're going to flip the formula by which we have arrived at this point in terms of living our life, whereby how I feel is a function of what's going on outside. So something can happen, I'll say it made me happy. Something else happens, I'll say it made me sad or peaceless. That's how we've just started to live our lives at this point. Raj Yoga is going to turn that upside down. And it goes through this period, a process of explaining what actually is going on. It makes total sense. What it suggests is the way I feel is not a function of what's going on outside. The way I feel is a function of what's going on inside. So we can expose two souls to the same stimuli and they'll have very different experiences, telling us it's a function of what's inside, not what's going on outside. And so Raj Yoga looks at what's going on inside of me. And first it explains you need to know who you are. You're a spiritual being, you're living spiritual energy traveling through time. And you come into a body, into a physical experience, and perform actions, which includes interactions. When we first begin, when we first start doing this, we first arrive, if you will, on the stage of life, we're in a very pure state. Imagine that you have a spiritual bank account, and that bank account is completely full. Now, when we say a physical bank account, we get it. We know there's money in there. We know what the currency is. But what's the currency of a spiritual bank account? It's not money, and it's not anything physical. What it is purity. When you first arrive, the currency of purity, very full in your personal account. And what that looks like as you come into action is that all of your actions and interactions are pure. So there's no ego, there's no greed, there's no judgment, expectation, demands, impatience. All those things that seem to color our actions now are not there when we have a full account stock of purity. We're in our highest spiritual state. Some say the highest state of goodness. Our actions are not about taking. We don't even care what the outcome is. It has nothing to do with it. We simply are expressing the goodness inside through our sense organs, how we speak, how we see, how we listen, how we interact. Everything is a chance to express the stock of goodness inside. It's wonderful. And then what happens? Well, funny thing is that as I, a spiritual being, spend time in a grosser form of energy, physical matter, I start to drain. I start to lose that stock of currency. I start to lose power. Some compare it to a battery starting to drain. And we know as a battery starts to drain, it doesn't function as well as it did when it had full power. So as my stock of purity starts to drain, simply by interacting with a grosser form of energy, that goodness, I have less access to that goodness, and I start to react. In other words, rather than simply expressing this beautiful stuff inside of me, I'm starting to be affected by what's going on outside. From responding and sharing, I'm starting to react and take. And this is not only does my account of purity drain down to zero, I actually start to go into debt, or impurity, we call it. I start to go into debt. And that debt is stored, whether it's credit or debt, whether it's fullness or loss, it's stored in what we call our personality. So our spiritual account shows up in our personality, how we show up in the world, how we present, how we operate. And so I start to have ego and I start to have greed. And these are all signs that I'm really in debt. I've lost that currency of purity or goodness. Meanwhile, while all of this is going on, there's something called the law of karma in effect. And the law of karma, this is why we can never say, once you understand the law of karma properly, we can never say, oh, something happened to me, as if we were just a victim of circumstance, just an innocent passerby and something happened to me. The law of karma says things don't just happen to you. Things happen because of you. I performed some action and created that consequence, and I'm experiencing the the consequence of an action I myself performed. I created whatever is happening in my current circumstance is a creation of my own past actions. None of this is meant to make us feel bad. It actually empowers us. It tells us, I can do something about this. If I'm just a hapless victim of things going on, I'm completely out of control. There's nothing I can do. Things just happen to me. But if I understand that it's a result of my own activity, I can do something about it. So there's two things I'm going to have to do, two steps. One, the first step is I need to increase my account. I need to start getting that power of purity back. My actions will not change. I'll just keep taking. I need to actually increase my currency of goodness or purity. And then the second step would be I need to integrate. I need to use that purity in my interactions. It's going to get interesting because now I'm trying to do this in a context where these consequences are coming at me. So I'm going to have to not react. I'm going to have to, things I myself created, I'm going to have to respond in a very pure way to things I myself created. So where am I going to get this purity from? Is there some place I can buy it, or where am I going to get it from? And this is why we talk about connecting to the source of purity. There's one shop, and that shop is called God. Raj Yoga is yoga or connection, a spiritual connection, not physical, a spiritual connection, a very internal connection the soul has with the Supreme Soul who's in a state of constant purity. And through that connection, I'm literally bathed. I get that purity back. That stock of purity is restored. And I need to keep that connection as I come into action, interaction, so I can respond in a pure way to what's going on. So what might this look like on a very practical level, you're saying? So imagine, because one of the top questions we get, souls like the Course, they feel good in the Course, and then at the end, they always ask the same question. It's usually about some relationship, and how am I going to, or these people, do I need to move away? How do I deal with this relationship? And so that's exactly what Raj Yoga is about. So to bring into your, maybe you won't be able to, you will not have any example you can think of, which is great. But if you can, to bring into your awareness the memory or the understanding, the feeling of some interaction that you would describe as maybe challenging, a soul that you feel that you have a challenging interaction with. And to understand that this is part of my spiritual account, that in some previous moment, maybe if you believe in rebirth, in perhaps some previous birth, I interacted with that soul not from a place of goodness. I created this tension. I contributed to this tension. In some previous moment, I didn't act from that pure place. And it's understandable. My account was depleting. I couldn't. So then it seems like from the first moment I meet that soul, there's this sense of tension. There's something there. Other souls don't seem disturbed, but I have this issue. And so if I can go into the experience of being a soul, which really reminds me of my capacity for goodness. That's what soul consciousness is. I immediately connect to my capacity for goodness, but I want that to have a lot of power behind it. So I also want to feel a connection to God, the Supreme Soul, who's really going to help me to hold that feeling of my own goodness in the face of a karmic consequence I created. And then I'm able to not react, not keep that debt going, but I'm able to respond from a very powerful, pure place We call it, I'm starting to settle that account. So Raj Yoga, this connection with God, pours so much purity in the soul. Many people ask, does it settle these accounts? The consequences will always have to come. But what matters isn't so much what's happening, but how do I experience what is happening? That's what matters. That's an inner thing. And if I'm in a very powerful place, very aware, very connected, very much emerging, experiencing my own peace, my own truth, my own purity, and I've got that powerful connection with the Supreme Soul, which helps me to hold that state, whatever consequences are coming, I will experience in a very light and easy way. We often say it feels as if it's half. It's a very light and easy way. I obviously will not be increasing that debt because I'm responding in a different way from my true personality. And yes, there's times in ignorance we don't even know that we've done something wrong. We're so disconnected from purity and truth. So over and over, just to cover all our bases, the main thing we need to do is just to experience myself to be a soul, be very connected to my intrinsic goodness, and feel that connection with the Supreme Soul helping to me to hold that state as I come into interaction, and helping also to dissolve any bad feelings inside the soul. That's the other beautiful thing of a connection with God. Imagine that we've been performing in this birth, and again, if you believe in rebirth, many births, we've been performing actions that went against our core values, our innate goodness, our innate purity. We've been performing actions that compromised our values, a total loss of integrity. In other words, we did not perform at our best. It got worse and worse. And we even have the phrase, wow, I got really ugly in that situation, where I feel my reaction was so far from dignity and maturity. And so all of that, the record of all of those moments, and there's thousands of them, of course, all those moments when I did not align with who I am as I came into action, they're all stored. There's a perfect account called the conscience. And you can imagine how heavy it's sitting in the conscience. The beauty of Raj Yoga, what I feel is the most beautiful thing about it, is to melt that heaviness in the conscience. God, the Supreme Soul, the ocean of understanding, the ocean of truth, does not judge. And I think we need an echo machine behind that statement, because what we did is project. We felt bad about ourselves on a very unconscious level. Externally, we think, hey, I don't have a problem. That's, of course, ego making us feel good about ourselves. But internally, when we're very honest and truthful, we feel horribly off. And we projected that feeling onto how we thought about God. We were judging ourselves very, very harshly. And we projected that onto God, saying he judges. We were almost afraid of God. And that completely destroys the purpose of that being. We already feel bad enough. We certainly don't need another human being, let alone a supreme being making us feel worse. So the function of God is to actually help us, empower us to benefit ourselves, to turn our accounts around, to have the self-respect to start to take responsibility for our accounts. And so that relationship with God is actually filled with so much understanding, so much forgiveness, so much purity and love. Almost we say innocence, the innocence of God, such that I start to understand why I went against my true nature. I start to be able to forgive myself. And in that state of forgiveness, I finally am free enough to help myself to turn my own accounts around. So we can't go back and change the past. We can't do that. We can understand what happened had to happen. We always did the best we could given the cards we were dealt, given what we knew, what we understood. We were literally forgetting ourselves. We did the best we could. We need to be very understanding about the past. But as we move forward, I need to develop the tools to take responsibility. And the main tool in that is that link with God, to be linked to the purifier who can help restore my innate goodness, and to be linked to the ocean of forgiveness, who can help to melt away that heaviness, that very punitive feeling towards the self that we have inside. So I don't know if that answers the question that had come earlier, but that's really the essence of Rash Yoga, is to melt away the effects of time, knowing everything happened exactly as it should, and start to build for myself a better future, understanding that that is dependent, that is determined by the law of karma. So I'll end there on that question. I don't know if there are others. All right. Wow. It's difficult to explore answers when there's no question. Okay. 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 Again, if you have questions for new ones joining, simply type them in the chat box. There's an explanation in the chat box you can see, and then you can type any questions you might have. And there are no stupid questions. Our technical crew has a question. Sometimes we're asked to check our attitude. Check my awareness, right? So the question was, sometimes we're asked to check our attitude, and why wouldn't I go to the root of things, which is awareness? And we have this saying in Raj Yoga. It's a bunch of Hindi terms, but they rhyme. It sounds better in Hindi than in English, but as is my smriti, so will be my vritti, my attitude. So that's where the question's coming from. And the beauty is, let's say I'm talking about the body. And I find it's not about the body when I'm saying, but it can give a very concrete example of how this works. So I might be experiencing a pain in my lower back. That seems to be quite common. So I'm experiencing a pain in the body. I have pain in the lower back. Now, there's several directions I could take this, how I choose to respond, what I choose to do. If you understand the body, what's actually going on is the pain is a very loyal indicator that I'm doing something, I'm not using the body properly. There's some mechanical problem, there's something going on. So it's I say, thank you, pain. You have brought my attention to the fact that there is something off here. Now from there's several ways I can go. The best would obviously be to figure out what's causing the pain. And the pain could be a referral. It could be something that's, say, tight hamstring. It could be that there's something structurally going funky in there. But I want to know what the cause, and that's when things usually go horribly sideways. We might take a pain reliever. The pain seems to be gone, but the problem's still there. So we haven't actually gotten to the root of the problem. So when we're talking about attitude and awareness, Sometimes it's easier for us to, it's actually thoughts is probably the first place we'd look. It's easier for us to check on the surface level because we're not yet adept at checking depth. So we look at the surface, we might look at thoughts. So I might say, why am I might notice I'm having a lot of critical thoughts here. You're lucky if you can even get that far. If you can even observe with absolute neutrality, I'm having critical thoughts. Thoughts are a very beautiful window into what's going on in the soul. I know critical thinking is not my intrinsic nature. So, what's going on? What's off inside? So, from the thoughts, I can go deeper. There might be an attitude. Oh, I've got an attitudinal problem. I start to realize I've got an attitudinal problem with people who wear pink. Anyone wears pink, I've got some sort of attitudinal reaction to that. But obviously, that's ridiculous. So, I want to go a little bit deeper. I only have that kind of issue when I'm body conscious, right? The story of the body, perhaps had some experience with people in pink, who knows? But I can become liberated from that effect. When I become soul conscious, I become very free of the story of the body. Some like to go very deeply into the story. Oh, this happened to me when I was 5, or this happened in a past birth. That is a psychological approach to transformation. And it's not that anything's wrong with that, but what we're actually exploring is a spiritual approach to transformation. And that means when I shift into soul consciousness, I get access to completely, I'm liberated from the story of the body. And I get access to the qualities of the soul. So I can use the thoughts as a very loyal indicator. I am not soul conscious right now. I am not spiritually aligned. Just like when there's pain in the body, it's a very loyal indicator. I am not physically, mechanically aligned, right? So similarly, the thoughts, attitudes, very useful feedback for me. I'm spiritually off right now. I need to definitely get my spiritual awareness into alignment. So it's good feedback. If I was spiritually aligned, there'd be no problem, right? And I'd get really positive feedback that there'd be good wishes equally for everyone, etc. So I use it always as right now. I mean, this idea of judging the self is useless, completely useless. Everything is great feedback, whether it's you perceived as positive, my behavior is positive or negative mistakes, but great feedback. And the same goes for physical. Those who are wise, they use everything. Oh, that my performance wasn't as good as it could be, or I've got pain. They use it all as feedback. Something is off mechanically, whether in the physical example, but here in the spiritual, my spiritual alignment is off. I am not experiencing myself to be a soul, so I am subject to the story of the body. I don't know if that makes sense. So the attitudes, yeah, we need to switch at the level of awareness, but the attitudes are very loyal feedback that I am off, if I am fortunate enough to interpret it that way. Mhm. Okay. Right. Yeah. Great. So the question is, would this, I'm hoping you're talking about a spiritual study like Raj Yoga, would this be a treatment for anxiety or panic attacks? I'm always really cautious to think it is the only treatment. It could possibly, it depends on the source of the anxiety or panic. Sometimes, I'm going to use a physical example again. I'm so sorry. But sometimes I feel, people need to get an operation done, but and the operation is essential. It's the only way, whether it's a heart problem or whatever, this operation is the way to heal. But their body, whether it's some other issue, it might be too much weight or whatever the case, they can't even get the operation. they have to do some preliminary work before they can even get the operation. So they might be put on a special diet, or they might have to, whatever the problem is, they have to do some pre-operation work before they can actually even get the operation. And so when we look at anxiety, panic, depression, any of these, sometimes it's okay, I can't quite embark on the spiritual practice yet. There's a few other pieces I might need to take care of. We talked about, psychology as well, because one aspect of the spiritual practice is that I'm going to have to use my mind a lot. And so I may have to do some work to even just get my mind in a place where it can start to engage in what we call meditation. My personal feeling at the end of the day, at the core, I feel spirituality is the operation. Whatever the issue, spirituality is the operation that has to happen. But we've gotten so distant, there may have to be some preparatory work we do before we can even embark on the spiritual practice. Definitely, if I'm in a place where I can have some kind of mastery over my mind and some kind of mastery over the emotional states as well, I find spiritual study extremely useful. Your question is very timely, because we are at a point, what we're all experiencing globally is creating such a wave of anxiety and tension and worry. So it gets to the point where you're not sure if, is the cause of my anxiety from me, or is it just that I'm picking up on the atmosphere in the world? It's really hard to tell at this point. So I feel it's very important, whatever the case, whether it's breathing or meditation or running, to have some kind of practice that at least helps us to experience some calm. There is the feeling of calm, and what a spiritual practice does is give you the power. So I can feel peaceful, but I actually want the power of peace. And what the power of peace does is, in the face of a peaceless or anxious or tense influence from the atmosphere or whatever, I am not affected. So it's a power. It's able to overcome a challenge. I find that spirituality gives that power. There's many practices that will help me to feel peaceful. So again, it might be music or jogging or breathing, many practices, and that's important. But to have a power of peace, able to face and transform challenges, I find spirituality is really specializes in that kind of gift, the power of peace. So I don't know if that answered the question, but it's an excellent question. It deserves perhaps a little bit more time, but really it's very, very relevant. I'm just looking at my technical team here. Okay. Okay. No, did you have a question though? We have a few minutes left. Mm. Mm-hmm. When you are a detached observer, you can you start to develop an attitude that's hard to change when you're a detached observer. Mm. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. 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 I think the question was, if I'm a detached observer, I might catch myself doing this, but if I'm not, um, I might start to have an attitude, not notice it's happening. It becomes quite rigid, quite entrenched. I think there's a couple of things because that has to do with being honest with myself. Many of the benefits that come from soul consciousness or detached observer. One of the biggest things, and I'm mentioning it because it touches on your question, one of the biggest things we run into, is when I've used this example many times. So if you're listening, you might have heard it, but what I had been told from lifeguards or people who teach swimming lessons is that it is much easier, much easier to teach a young child how to swim than to take an adult who's already swimming and do stroke improvement or teach them how to swim, if you will. And the reason being is that the adult has very entrenched mechanics, most of which they're unaware of, whereas the child is like a blank slate, right? So from the get-go, you're dealing with a blank slate. It's like a child in school, blank slate. They completely surrender to your teaching, and you can teach them the right basics, the right mechanics. But with an adult, they're already coming with entrenched stuff. They're not aware of most of what they're doing. Many times with adult swimmers, they have to start to get out the videotape because the instructor will say, "You're doing this," and the adult says, "No, I'm not." And the instructor saying, "Yes, you are." And they're saying, "No, I'm not." And they'll go, "Okay, we'll get out the videotape. We'll videotape you." And then they get out the videotape, you show them, and they go, "Oh my God, I didn't know. I am doing that." And if you've ever watched yourself on video, you will know exactly what this is about. I remember once watching myself on video. It was in a course. I don't know. We had to do some speaking. And I can't believe how many times I was going, and I was like, I had no idea. So it's, or saying so. How many times I say so, right? It all becomes clear. All these little deceptions, these things I can't see in myself become clear. So when we come into a spiritual practice with such good intentions, I am ready to change. The problem is I'm not coming with a blank slate. And I'm not even aware of a lot of the stuff I've got. So what happens is I haven't got a blank slate. I've got this spiritual practice. I've got these other ideas. I might start to keep these ideas, but as we say, mix them or dress them up in spiritual clothing. But I've really got the ideas still there. And this is what happens with attitudes a lot, because they're quite under the surface. Most of our attitudes, we're not aware. I think we'd be quite shocked if they were suddenly made clear to us, the attitudes we have. And the thoughts might, but it depends on our capacity to discern. And our capacity to discern depends, again, on soul consciousness. It gives that clarity of what we call the third eye, the capacity to really see the self clearly, all of these little attitudes that we've got. And so, but now I'm a spiritual student, so I start to dress my attitudes up in spirituality or righteousness, if you will. I'm still holding the same ideas, those old mechanics. I'm just mixing them in with these. So nothing's having good effect. The spiritual practice is not full effect because they're mixing with old attitudes. So I can go along for quite a while thinking I am moving along spiritually, but I'm actually dragging these old attitudes with me, dressed up in spiritual clothing. So it's really a challenge. As I'm sharing this, I'm remembering a story. I was in a retreat in the spiritual headquarters in Madhuban, and it was a woman's retreat, which is an odd concept for a spiritual practice. But anyways, and the facilitator was very open and really inspiring in sharing this. She was just sharing the reason that she was offering it as a woman's retreat, is she had noticed in herself she still was carrying on a very subtle level certain attitudes towards brothers, right? They were very subtle, but they would come through. If she was to do this retreat, she didn't feel she could serve them fully until she addressed this in herself through spiritual practice. So to have that awareness is wonderful. And then to be able to use spirituality to address those attitudes, it's amazing. It's sometimes kind of a wonder how many of these attitudes and limitations, it goes on and on, all a result of forgetting we are souls. As I remember, I don't have to go at them one by one. They will start to change automatically if I practice the experience I am a soul. So that's very heartening. If I had to go at them one by one, but the fact that they just naturally start to transform. And it's very beautiful. I will end here because I know we're over time. Meeting the spiritual leaders of this organization is a beautiful experience because what soul consciousness actually is saying is who you are. I'm not going to have an experience really of who you are by the body you're in, your gender, your culture, your language, none of it. None of it has anything to do with who you really are. And coming to an organization where that's the kind of vision or attitude, this equal valuing of every being, even the actions you perform don't really tell me who you really are. I'm not going to be deceived by anything on the surface, not even the actions you perform. To be able to look that deeply at another being and have that deep sense of valuing that other being is a beautiful experience when you see it practically. And I think that's why this organization has spread to countries all over the world, because it has that attitude of a deep vision of equally valuing every human being and not being deceived by anything on the surface. It's a very benevolent attitude. So I'll end there because we are out of time. Thank you for joining. Congratulations for getting here and being part of our inaugural session. We'd love your feedback if it's useful. We did have questions come up in the past and no forum to address them. If you have questions, send them in for next week. Otherwise, yes. Okay, yes, I have been told to remind you of the next Raj Yoga Foundations course where you get to go properly and deeply into these ideas of Raj Yoga. It is May 24th and 25th, a Saturday and Sunday, but 23rd, 24th, sorry. So the 23rd is a Saturday. It's from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And the 24th is a Sunday. It's from 11:30 to 2:30. So a bit funny timing. Yeah, and both days. It's not an either or. It's both days that you need to take for the full course. So the information is on our website. And I think it's being put in the chat box right now. So we will keep the chat box open for a minute or two so that you can grab that information if you would like it. Again, there's a lot being offered online through the center right now. Please visit our website. But the next evening meditation is Thursday, Experience 6:45 to 7:30, followed by Raj Yoga Essentials, condensed taste of Raj Yoga, 7:35 to 8:15 Thursdays. Om Shanti and good evening.